Well, good afternoon from New York City and welcome. My name is Regina. I am the coordinator of the Americas Dialogue and Education Policy Initiative at the Institute of Latin American Studies, or ILLIS, at Columbia University. On behalf of ILLIS, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the second of a series of book and paper presentations and discussions that we will be having this academic year. The book that will be presented today is in English, Innovation and Inclusion in Education, Policies and Implementation Strategies. The original title of the book, as you know it, is in Spanish, and it is Innovación e Inclusión en Educación, Políticas y Estrategias de Implementación. So we will begin the presentation with the presentation of the book, followed by a quick discussion, and then a Q session where you will be able to raise your hand and ask any questions you have. So once again, please note that this event is being recorded, will be uploaded to ILLIS's YouTube, and may be shared through its different communications channels. Now, I have the pleasure to welcome today the three editors of the book. Professor Karen Monkman, Professor Zaira Navarrete, and Professor Carlos Ornelas. Karen Monkman, PhD, is Professor Emerita at DePaul University in Chicago. She is currently President of the Comparative and International Education Society, CIES. Her areas of research include equity, gender, and migration and globalization as they relate to education. In addition to being part of this book, she has two other co-edited books that will be out in 2022, next year. Belonging in Changing Educational Spaces, Negotiating Global, Transnational, and Neoliberal Dynamics with Anne Ferkovich, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, and Navigating Precarity in Educational Contexts, Reflection, Pedagogy, and Activism for Resistance and Change, with Amira Prowler and Anne Ferkovich. Karen Monkman has co-edited books, authored numerous journal articles and book chapters, and written about many countries, including Ecuador and Mexico. Now, Zaira Navarrete, PhD, is a professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and a member of the Mexican National System of Researchers, ISNI, the Mexican Council of Educational Research, and past president of the Mexican Society of Comparative Education, among others. Her research work focuses on professional training and construction of identities, and perspectives on education and pedagogies, policies, innovation, and uses of ICTs in education, and comparative and international education. Her most recent book is titled La Formación Profesional del Pedagogo Universitario en México, un complejo juego de interpelaciones, identificaciones y resignificaciones, published by UNAM in 2021, this year. Zaira Navarrete has a very prolific career as editor, co-editor, and author of articles, book chapters, and books. Now, Carlos Ornelas, PhD, is Professor of Education and Communication at the Metropolitan Autonomous University, or UAM, Member Emeritus of ISNI, and current President of the Mexican Society of Comparative Education. He was the first Mexican to obtain a PhD in education from Stanford University. He has been a visiting professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, Harvard University Graduate School of Education, Hiroshima and Nagoya Universities in Japan, and institutions. He has published 7 books as an individual author, more as a compiler, and has almost referred research articles in specialized journals and collected books. Carlos Ornelas has also written many bibliographic essays, reviews, and non-academic papers, and writes a weekly column in the Mexican newspaper Excelsior. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Romina. And we, the editors, thank you, ILLIS, and we wish that Regina Cortina, who is our host here, she cannot be here, but we hope that she will resolve the problem very soon favorably. And thank you very much for this presentation, Romina. Well, this book came out recently, although the roots of it it has a more history behind. Some of the papers of the 19 chapters of this book came out as reviewed of the essays that the authors presented at the fourth Encuentro forum of the Mexican Comparative Society that was held, and the CIS Regional Meeting Society held in October of 2019. Afterwards, Zaira and Karen and I worked together with some other friends who work with Zaira at UNAM. We were selecting chapters, editing them, reading them, and then we Zaira recruit about almost 100 of reviewers, all of them members of the National System of Researchers, who really went through the essays, made a lot of suggestions, and they did approve or not for publication. So that was the idea. We follow, though not dogmatically, but we follow the guidelines of UNESCO for we start with the assumption that education is a public good that requires a lot of innovations to promote the inclusion of the underrepresented social groups, and to add the differently able to teaching and learning. Blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry. We follow these guidelines for UNESCO, and we put together this. So the title of the book, it came from out of that, innovation and inclusion. We are committed to do that. We also thank Karen, who was the president of CIS at the time, who came down to Mexico City in October 29, and as chair of the CIS, the Midwest region, and we have the regional conference together with SOMEC that day. And so we have contributions from not only from Mexico, but also from colleagues from South America and the United States. Actually, the opening lecture of Karen is also the opening chapter of the book that she reviewed, fully reviewed that. What is the structure of the book? We have two concepts as umbrella for the book: innovation and inclusion. So the first chapters try to deal with the innovation. Innovation, it is fully understood as changing something, improving, and making things work together. So we work from different perspectives. The authors that we selected work from this different perspective to take some cases or to reflect on theoretical issues about things related to innovation and education development in several perspectives. For instance, equity and inclusion, that is the first part, the first chapter that I have problems with the slides. I cannot read correctly. So, but I assume you can read. So I will try to do not read, but just to outline what it says. Inclusion is one of the aims of UNESCO, but also of some other organizations and national governments, and it's quite difficult to achieve in many ways. So, innovation in make international comparisons show us that is a very hard path to follow. It's not easy. And then we have the chapter wrote by Carolina Tapia Cortez from Universidad de Anáhuac and Sergio Augusto Cárdenas. They tried to theorize about the construction of concepts of innovation and the strategy for development of research competencies. Competencies. And it is a reflexive text. They do a lot of work. They base their thinking in many, many authors from different perspectives, and they conclude that the concept of this construction strategy, this concept of constructing, this strategy of constructing concept is a very good method to advance in higher education, especially for students, the training on research. The following. The innovative practice is not only the reflection concepts, it's not only the idea to innovate, but to put into practice. And so what is the innovation? It came really, really fast after this chapter was written with the pandemic that we had, but it looked at that time that educational practice with digital technology is can bring faster learning and create new experiences for both teachers and students. And especially, and the case is the open university system in Mexico City. The idea of this collaboration is that Luz Paola Costa, she's a professor at the Catholic University in Lumen Gentium in Colombia, and she studied the Mexican system of distance education. And then, I'm sorry, a very well-known Mexican scholar now, she's a counselor of the this institution that substitutes the National Institute for Evaluation, the Mejoredu, the Commission for the Continuing Improvement of Teachers in Mexico. Tomás Miklos wrote a chapter on the Nueva Escuela Chiapaneca, the new school system in Chiapas. That was designed with the spirit of collaboration and the evaluation. And the highlight program is a very small case, but the idea is to very humanistic idea to educate from the work as allies and as brothers, sisters, and it reflects the concordance. Very, very, this is very, very close to UNESCO's Agenda 2030. And then we have the chapter by Olga Maya at the University of Intercontinental, the Intercontinental University in Mexico City. That she's a teacher by training, and then she earned her PhD at the Pedagogical University a few decades ago. And she's very committed to study, not only in this chapter, but she has a whole book on continuing education, teachers training. And she has in this chapter, she debates with the regulations emanating from the Directorate of Continuing Education and Updating of Teachers, of Professional Development. And she's very critical of what in the past education reform the government was done. And I know that because we talked a few weeks ago, she's also very critical of what is going on nowadays in the same field. This chapter, we have some debates whether to include it or not. The reviewers said it is good, but it is not very well written. So we sent him back. We sent it back to the author, and then he reworked that very hard, and he really fulfilled what we're waiting for. And then he presented a final chapter, a final version with a very the product is a very good chapter of the challenges that the teachers training and the management, in Spanish is gestión, that are generated by educational innovation in the current context. That is the struggle between innovation, the future, the changes, and the persistence of traditions from long time, the long time establishment in Mexico. Then, in the same line, Manuela Vadillo Gaona and Maria de Lourdes Bonilla Barragán at the National Polytechnical Institute in Mexico City, they enter fully into the agenda of UNESCO in their peace, innovation management, knowledge, education organization, and the indissoluble relationship of social development and the common good. That is the idea that with technological instruments, education can be better, but it's not independent of what the humans can do with them. Technology do not work alone. It is not by itself. The next one, time is consuming us. And then what the professors of higher education said about innovation. And then we have these wonderful chapters that shows the contrast between those who favor innovation and those who are very indifferent, or they oppose the innovation. The reason is that to acquire competence, enough capabilities to innovate, it requires a lot of time, a lot of reflection, a lot of study, and it's very difficult. So the idea is not only that teachers and professors do innovate, but also that the students join in their efforts. And they try to do that at the Universidad Veracruzana. The next one. This is a beautiful chapter that wrote by an educator and a poet himself. He writes poems, but then Javier Suárez Trejo, who works at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, outside Lima, relates the innovative experience of the Laboratorio de Vanguardia Pedagógica. It links the urban experience with the poor kids in the periphery and how the use of poems can enlighten but also motivate poor kids, and not only poor kids, the little kids, to study even more and to collaborate and deliberate among themselves in order to achieve more knowledge. It is not only the text is very well written, but it is a mixture of an essay together with literature, more like a short story type of literature. The next one. And following with that line, working with kids, this time not with poetry alone, but with plays, with plays, and how those activities were very well organized and spontaneous, and how spontaneous the children can be. It represents a humanistic approach to the arts, and it shows very good results in for the development of reading comprehension and cooperative activities, through cooperative activities among the students as peers. The following one, please, Zaira. And the BOA is the semillero de investigadores, is how, because we identified in Mexico that a lot of the problems in Latin America and Mexico is the low reading comprehension of most of the students. And I experienced that even at the graduate level at my university. And Ana María Iberri and Erika Egolatina Barrios from the Semillero de Investigadores discussed the advantage of this imported instrument from the Russian experiment that is called the Guiding Basis for Action, BOA, by the initials in Spanish. And then they support teachers with the transcription, dictado, how to capture not only the meaning, but also the clarity of the concept. And they also follow the development goals of the millennium of the UNESCO agenda for 2030. The next one. And then our colleague, Marco Aurelio Navarro, and his colleagues at the Autonomous University of Tamaulipas. Marco Aurelio Navarro is the honorary professor of SOMEC. He was, we appointed him as the first president of SOMEC, and he has done a wonderful work, both planning and organizing the SOMEC, as well as his own scholarly work. In this essay is the planning to change experiential and innovation in upper secondary higher education. This author argued that the innovations come not from a spontaneous generation of ideas. And if that's so, it won't last. The following one. And then we have the second part of the book. The second part, which covers more inclusion. So, Zaira, you have the room.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Romina and Ilas, for the space and the presentation. In the second part, comparative studies on educational innovation and inclusion, se presentan diferentes ensayos, estudios y se centran en lo comparativo. El primer estudio comparativo es el del profesor Alejandro Ortiz Cirilo, profesor del Colegio de Morelos, y él aborda las formas convergentes de inclusión y exclusión por motivos religiosos en 3 países, Argentina, Brasil y México. Él considera que la educación laica es un medio para la inclusión de las diversidades y que a pesar de la creciente secularización de las sociedades contemporáneas, es posible observar la influencia de la religión en el espacio público que impone nuevos retos a la educación. El segundo capítulo, de índole comparativa, corresponde a Hugo Rangel Torrijo, de la Universidad de Guadalajara, y presenta un ensayo sobre innovar el concepto de innovación, políticas de inclusión e innovación educativa desde una perspectiva internacional, y compara la experiencia de Estados Unidos, Francia, Canadá y México a partir del análisis de un caso concreto, y propone el concepto alternativo de innovación en contraste con los enfoques dominantes propuestos por organismos intergubernamentales como la Organización para la Cooperación y el Desarrollo Económico, la OCDE. Un tercer capítulo, también comparativo, es el que presenta Gustavo Mejía Pérez de la Universidad Pedagógica Nacional y presenta una interpretación de la expansión de la educación superior en el Valle de México y el Gran Buenos Aires. Es un estudio comparativo México-Argentina y ensaya una aproximación geoespacial de la geografía de la educación para aglomerar datos y tendencias. Otro capítulo es el que presenta Alondra Marina, Eliseo Guajardo y Erika Egleontina de la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Morelos. Hacen una comparación de las representaciones sociales del proceso de inclusión en alumnos universitarios. su foco, su centro de atención es la inclusión de la educación superior con estudiantes con discapacidades. Otro estudio está a cargo de mí con dos colegas yo de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, la profesora Paola Andrea de la Secretaría de Educación del Estado de Veracruz y el profesor Héctor Manzanilla del Instituto Politécnico Nacional, donde presentamos un análisis de las políticas educativas implementadas en 4 programas sectoriales de educación en México, planteado como principales categorías de análisis la innovación, la inclusión y las TICs, así como la inserción en el desarrollo dentro de los objetivos, estrategias y líneas de acción a seguir en cada uno de los programas revisados. Hasta aquí la parte de estudios comparativos, y para cerrar el libro presentamos el ensayo de Carlos Ornelas, profesor de la Autónoma Metropolitana Xochimilco, y presenta 5 modelos de la compleja relación entre investigadores de la educación y altos funcionarios de la Secretaría de Educación Pública, y presenta los vínculos entre el saber y poder. Ornelas desmenuza las perspectivas y concepciones, contrastes entre expertos y ejecutores. La tercera de esta parte de este libro la presentará la profesora Karen Monkman. Adelante, Karen.
Karen, you're mute.
Thank you. I'm going to address the issue of why this book is important and why you should read the book. The chapters in the book bring together many important authors who are working on innovation and inclusion in Latin America primarily, but some other places. While this book did not intend to provide narrow answers to questions arising out of the application or lack of adaptation of the Sustainable Development Objectives, and this was not stated in the call for papers, it does contribute meaningfully to our collective work in pushing our thinking about innovation and inclusion forward. It challenges us to think critically and dynamically about both external influences and internal processes that impact the experience of education. Even before UNESCO launched the Education for All program in 1990 and the Millennium Development Goals in 2000, education researchers advocated for quality and inclusive education. As in many fields, knowledge generation and scientific paradigm shifts are taken up in global approaches, as we see in the increasing complexities in the Sustainable Development Goals since 2015. UNESCO's 2030 agenda recognizes the work of the world's academics and experts in various fields. The editors of this book, the 3 of us, and we believe the authors of the chapters agree. We support the efforts to end poverty through scholarship and work in the field and with policy. We call for zero hunger on the planet, for health and well-being to be universal, and for quality and inclusive education to contribute to gender equity, substantive equality, and non-discrimination for any cause. And education has an important role to play in these sustainability processes. Through commitments to sustainability goals, we must also support educational experience for learners and educators that draw them in, get them engaged, and help them build on the successes of today. As such, social and human development could be sustainable in the long term. The field of comparative and international education has contributed a lot to our current understandings and practices in education for a better future. We still have much to contribute, however. In the Mexican Society for Comparative Education, SOMEC, and the Comparative and International Education Society, CIES, we continue these efforts. This book, among other titles, can be consulted free of charge with the link that's put in the chat. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much to all 3 of you. We're right on time. That's amazing. So I will proceed to just provide some brief comments about this volume. As you already mentioned, part 2 provides several specific cases that tackle innovation in education and inclusion in education. It begins with Karen's chapter on what innovation and inclusion are. The language is easy, so the reader can follow how inclusion is interpreted in the United States and globally, a concept that is usually linked to access, but not guaranteeing the effective involvement of those who are affected by or benefit from the policy. Likewise, it explains how the concept of innovation should not be the end of a policy or strategy, but the means to achieve that goal. The rest of the chapters in part 2, or all the chapters in part 2, are rich in that they do not limit themselves to a certain education level, geographic area, or topic. In that way, we can read about early childhood education, higher education programs, even programs that prepare graduate students to academia, and of course, ICTs, pointing out that innovation does not only lie in technology, but it is a big part of the puzzle, as Zaira and her co-authors explain. Part 3 provides a more global view of innovation and inclusion by comparing cases across countries, as we saw, and using frameworks of analysis that are innovative in themselves. Some chapters offer empirical findings and implementation strategies based on the study of specific projects, while those chapters that focus on policy prefer document analysis. The volume plays with the idea between policy and implementation that way, perhaps intentionally, perhaps not. But in the end, the reader will find empirical research as well as the background information to understand education policies. Granted, the volume largely includes chapters from Mexico, but it also manages to provide an international perspective by incorporating other views, mostly from Latin America. Well, we already went over that, but all these chapters and examples are rich in exploring the 2 key concepts announced in the title. And finally, of course, yes, the volume closes with Carlos' chapter, which discusses the everlasting and sometimes contradictory relationship between science and policy, with a focus on Mexico. It makes a reader wonder how innovation plays out in this interaction, this back and forth that is also reflected in the different ways and interests that academia and politicians have to influence education policy. This chapter leaves readers wondering once again how to go about education policy and implementation. So this is a 400-page volume. As Karen was saying, the link to it is to the online version is in the chat, but there's also a printed version, right? And with that, I close my comments and open the floor to any questions. So just please raise your hand or just feel free to speak up.
Romina, thank you very much for that wonderful review. It's you did a very good reading for work. We thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you to all of you. This is a very, very interesting book with so many interesting chapters. But while we leave we give time to our audience to think of some questions maybe. I would like to ask you, the 3 of you, how you see the difference of the meaning of inclusion in different parts of the world, especially in the United States, because it takes a very different meaning in policy here, but also globally. And so are policies linked, or are they completely different? And what challenges you have seen in the implementation between global and national policy in inclusion overall?
Did you get it, Zaira?
Yeah.
Bueno, yeah. Thank you, Romina, for your comments. Okay, el libro tiene mucho la intención de incluir casos de experiencias exitosas para la inclusión. También casos de políticas, de análisis de políticas, pero sobre todo casos que favorecen la inclusión en diferentes espacios y con diferentes personas. Este libro y tiene casos específicos para enseñar a los niños a mejorar la escritura cuando los niños tienen alguna discapacidad, por ejemplo. También presenta casos exitosos de cómo la educación a distancia ha logrado incluir a más personas en el ámbito pues, educativo, que es el que nos compete. También presenta casos comparativos de cómo una misma política ha sido exitosa en 2 o más países y presenta tanto a los actores que hacen posible que sea exitosa esa política y también las situaciones contextuales para que la política aterrizada por medio de los profesores o de los sujetos sea exitosa. Entonces es como una parte experiencia global que analiza tanto a las políticas, a las personas, a los sujetos que la implementan y a los sujetos que afecta directamente, que en este caso son los alumnos, ¿no? Entonces, sí presenta casos muy interesantes y el capítulo también que nos presenta a Karen Monkman, un estudio comparativo, es un estudio muy, muy interesante y nos analiza conceptualmente la distinción entre la igualdad y la equidad. Entonces, son conceptos claves para analizar y reflexionar sobre el tema de la inclusión y si es importante darle a los alumnos igualdad o equidad. ¿Qué necesita el alumno, no? Entonces, la propuesta de Karen es que hay que darle al alumno lo que necesite para que esté en condiciones similares, porque no se le puede dar lo mismo a todos los alumnos. Hay que analizar siempre el contexto de los estudiantes para poder darle las herramientas necesarias y lograr una educación inclusiva y equitativa.
Respecto a tu, I'm sorry, regarding your question, Romina, again, Karen's chapter is very, very enlightening because she uses both images to show the difference between equity and equality, and then the empirical case in Cambodia, where she has been working for many, many years, and how this can be used. And then most of the papers who deal with international comparisons also take that into account, although not with the same words exactly, but the idea, the concept, the reflection are quite similar. So that's why, not only because it was the inaugural lecture at the conference in Mexico City, but also for the case, it's a general introduction to the issues of equality and the difference with egalitarian issues and how the inclusion of come up together. And yes, I think we see different the concept of inclusion here down the Rio Bravo than in the States. In the States are using more like putting them at the school and to resolve the problem. And here we are behind. We are backwards even in that conception. Because we don't have enough infrastructure. We don't treat very well the teachers. And we have a lot of problems with inefficiencies of the bureaucracy. And so, according to all type of evaluations, low quality of education. We had a lot of enrollments. Now, in the last 2 years with the pandemic, a lot of dropouts for many reasons, not only because the pandemic, but also for the tendency of the to dropping out the school, especially at the high school level, is historical. Now it's even worse. Interestingly, if the last data put out last week by Mejoredu, in high school, middle education in Mexico, this year the dropouts were less. And then why? That it was the year before. Why? And it is because all the students enrolled, it doesn't matter the grades, it doesn't matter the background, the socioeconomic background, everyone has a scholarship from this Bienestar program of Presidente López Obrador. So for many of them, it's better to stay at school, even if they don't learn, even if they don't like it, they're going out because there is no employment for them. So those are the excluded. Those who drop out, they exclude, sometimes by themselves. In medium education, there are studies that they show that students do not drop out because of economic reasons or because they are dumb, but because they are unhappy when they're supposed to teach and learn. They're supposed to learn.
I heard your question also as kind of globally, how is the notion of inclusion being taken up? And I think that's a great question that everywhere we should be thinking about. In the US, it is generally understood as including children with special needs in mainstream classes. And there's problems with that. Sometimes it works great and sometimes it doesn't. There are people within the special education world who argue that for some kinds of disabilities, that's never going to really happen. And I'm not taking a stand on it. I'm just kind of trying to think about the issues more broadly. But I think what's really important is that we not limit the concept to just people with disabilities. I'm thinking of examples. One example is a movement of landless workers in Brazil who advocated for public schooling for their children. They're a mobile group of people. There's quite a few projects in African countries to include mobile populations, that is populations who move from place to place, in educational processes. That is, some of them, they create schools that move with the communities. There are issues, of course, about gender and about religious groups and about rural communities and other minorities who don't have full access. So the notion of access is often used with the notion of inclusion. And when we start moving toward assessing inclusion or access, we start kind of, in my personal view, reducing the richness of those concepts to something that's easily countable. So we've been talking for decades about getting children into classrooms. And that's what Carlos was just talking about. It's, people can be there physically and they can be registered, but are they actually learning? Or do they have access to a meaningful educational process that will help in their future and society's future? So I think if we can start thinking about inclusion as a much more dynamic issue that isn't just about bodies and seats in classrooms, and more about including people in meaningful educational processes, then we might be able to complicate that notion, both in the US and elsewhere. The US does not have any magic answers for this. We've just been working on it in the realm of special education for a little longer than some places. And this goes beyond the book, but I think the book evokes a lot of really interesting concepts and ideas that are presented in particular locations and times, but they have relevance for many more places and times.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
ahead, Carlos. You wanted to say
No,
something?
I agree with Karen. It's sometimes but that is in contrast. Inclusion in the development goals of UNESCO is more broad. It says not only to be registered at the school, but also to provide enough material, not materials, the necessary things so the students can learn what is expected to learn. That is one thing. And not only for a few ones, those who have social capital or family background that can help them, but to all of them. That is when the concept of equity came. Give more to those who needs more and not to give them equally. That is even in the law in Mexico, but it's not respected. Even the schools for the migrant poor for next year, this coming fiscal year will not exist. The government took off all the money from that to put them in the Maya train or the new airport, because those are. So education in Mexico nowadays is suffering from a very aggressive government attack. And higher education, they try to put in jail 31 scientists, scientificos from who were the social council of CONACYT. The president says that the national university is neoliberal and conservative. And so he's telling the students, rebel against your authority. So he's doing what we used to do like an activist. And now today, these days, is a very aggressive politics against the center of excellence in higher education. You see the Center for Economic for Research and Teaching in Economics. They said that they are training neoliberal economists, so they have to change us. So they impose a new director, and we have now on strike. The students are under a strike. So these years are very, very bad for education. Although in the speech, not in the discourse, the speech of the president is very inclusive. First, the poor people, but then in practice, is not that way.
I think even with the UN development goals, they're great in terms of being inclusive, and I'm in full support of them. But because the assessment processes narrow down what is assessed, that guides what inclusion looks like. So if they're not going to be able to assess what quality education looks like beyond superficial indicators, then it's really difficult to get to that level of quality education.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. Thank you for this, because as we were talking about inclusion, and then through your answers, we can track, like we can see how that links to innovation. Because, well, there's a question here that's asking, what possibilities does Latin America have to innovate, given that many states in the region face the prevalence of political legitimacy, a preference, right, over innovation within the education system? Anyone?
Your voice fade away a little bit when you were asking the question.
Can you read the question again,
please?
Oh, okay, I will. Can you hear well this time? Can you hear me?
Yeah, please speak slowly. Oh. It is the sound in your microphone or in your computer.
Okay, all right. So the question is, what possibilities does Latin America have to innovate, given that many states in the region face the prevalence or the preference of political legitimacy over innovation within the education system?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And to innovate for the government, for the dominant groups in these societies in Latin America, most of them, not in Uruguay, for instance, not in Chile, although in Chile, even though it's a right-wing government, they are not authoritarian. For most of them, it's more important to keep peace and maintain this, what is legitimation, or whatever is working. Innovation is risky. They can change. Or if there is a very good innovation that make people think beyond what is permitted within the establishment, it is a danger for the established power. And that is why many governments are afraid to push for innovation. I know the case of Mexico better than others in Latin America now with the pandemic issues. It was very conservative, the opening of the government to the new technologies, to the ITC. Although we have in the past such innovations such as the telesecundarias in the 1960s, we have the background of many issues. It was very conservative. So we better go to TV, because those guys, teachers who are innovating, they use the media, the WhatsApp, they use the science bring down from Google or from whatever, videos and so other things. So they were afraid. So you should do what we tell you to do. That was the command for the teachers from the Ministry of Education. Both secretaries of public education in this administration are doing the same. Innovate under a rule. And yeah, legitimacy is keeping things together. Believe me, the root of legitimacy, according to Max Weber, is the credibility of the ruler or whatever is legitimate. And if you don't believe, it is the legitimacy provides, it will become a crisis of legitimacy. Legitimacy. Did I pronounce that well? I cannot think in English.
Well, I am not the best English speaker here, but I think it's legitimacy. But it's fine. If you want to speak in Spanish, that's also fine.
No, legitimacy. Yeah, I try to do that, but
no, it's very difficult, and these two concepts actually, yes, do play with each other. Zaira, ¿quieres agregar algo más a la dificultad de innovación? Tu micrófono.
Sí, gracias. Sí. La innovación, como señalaba un poco Carlos, en América Latina ha estado presente desde los años 60, 70 por medio de la televisión educativa, la educación por correspondencia. A eso ya se le llama educación, bueno, pues innovar en educación, ¿no? Educación a distancia, educación por correspondencia. Pero ahora, con la pandemia dejó expuesto, yo creo que no solo en América Latina, sino en muchas partes del mundo, las carencias en cuanto a infraestructura, en cuanto a conexión a Internet. Gran parte de la población, una colega, Ileana Rojas, y yo realizamos un estudio en 2019 y más del 70% de los hogares no contaban con Internet en México. Entonces, cuando llega la pandemia es una realidad ahí, y que luego lograron la conexión por medio de los teléfonos celulares y se comunicaron los niños con sus profesores, los alumnos con sus profesores por medio de WhatsApp, como decía Carlos, pero actualmente acaba de salir un reporte, un estudio hace un par de días que el 28% de los alumnos no tiene conexión a Internet en México, pero esto tiene una larga historia, no es solo de ahora, ¿no? Es de que los gobiernos no le han invertido en tecnología, en innovación a la educación, y la pandemia evidenció el estado en el que se encontraba México, América Latina y muchos países del mundo. No se contaba con infraestructura tecnológica en las escuelas, no se contaba con infraestructura tecnológica o, bueno, en los hogares por parte de las familias, y esto está relacionado también con el tema de la pobreza. Y esto se vincula también con el tema de la inclusión. Entonces, innovación e inclusión en ese sentido van de la mano. En términos didácticos, la innovación estuvo presente por parte de los profesores porque buscaron estrategias para enseñar a sus alumnos. En ese sentido, innovaron, inventaron, crearon formas de llegar a los alumnos, de educar, ¿no? De transmitir contenidos, de enseñar, ¿no? Y de recuperar también los conocimientos de los alumnos. En ese sentido sí hubo innovación. En el sentido de innovación tecnológica, ha habido pocos avances, realmente ha habido pocos avances. En América Latina, la educación se siguió ofertando por medio de las escuelas, ¿no? Virtuales ahora, pero por medio de la televisión educativa. Entonces, en América Latina se hizo uso de la televisión educativa. Estos programas de telesecundaria, como decía Carlos, que ya estaban desde los años 60, 70, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, no se contó con infraestructura, con programas. En México se crearon los programas Aprende en Casa 1, Aprende en Casa 2, Aprende en Casa 3. En eso estamos, pero se tomaron contenidos de plataformas que ya estaban instaladas, que ya estaban, o sea, no hubo contenido nuevo, diferente, y ahí sí faltó como mayor infraestructura, pero por parte de los profesores sí hubo innovación, sí hubo creatividad para enseñar, y pues esa es la realidad en la que estamos en México y en América Latina, pero también, insisto, se evidenció en muchos países que no se contaba con los recursos necesarios para transitar de una educación presencial a una educación en línea. Se evidenciaron las carencias, las desigualdades. Ese es mi comentario.
Y la pandemia vino a agravar lo que ya estaba mal y generó problemas nuevos. Y sí hubo muchos profesores que innovaron.
Sí, eso sí, yes, I agree. And I think that the book reflects that as well. I know that the book probably was written prior to the pandemic, and it does not necessarily touch on these issues, but it does reflect how our teachers are resourceful and everywhere, not only in Mexico, in other, we can see it all throughout the chapters in very well. So definitely, please take a look at the book. Again, the link is on the chat if you prefer, the online version, or you can go for. So with that, it's already time for us to be wrapping up. So is there any other question before I wrap up? No? Okay, well, it was so good to have you with us. Carlos, Zaira, Karen, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your experience. Thank you to all the audience for joining us today. As a kind reminder, this book presentation will be uploaded on ILLIS's YouTube within the next couple of weeks if you want to revisit what we discussed. And well, we hope you enjoyed this talk, and until soon, hopefully. Thank you so much.